Hello, Internet! Gonna post this about 8 o'clock tonight on Facebook. It's time for Chapter 2 of the 6th book in the Oz series. This one's called The Emerald City of Oz. And yes, this is the second chapter. The first chapter we read last night had the Gnome King getting very angry and demanding he wanted his magic belt back. You remember that's the magic belt that Dorothy and Ozma got from him way back in book 2? 3? Book 3. So, we'll see what happens. In Chapter 2, this one's called How Uncle Henry Got into Trouble. Dorothy Gale lived on a farm in Kansas with her Aunt Em and her Uncle Henry. It was not a big farm, nor a very good one, because sometimes the rain did not come when the crops needed it. Then everything withered and dried up. Once a cyclone had carried away Uncle Henry's house, so that he was obliged to build another. And as he was a poor man, he had to mortgage his farm to get the money to pay for the new house. Then his health became bad, and he was too feeble to work. The doctor ordered him to take a sea voyage, and he went to Australia and took Dorothy with him. That cost a lot of money, too. Uncle Henry grew poorer every year, and the crops raised on the farm only bought food for the family. Therefore, the mortgage could not be paid. At last, the banker who had loaned him the money said that if he did not pay on a certain day, his farm would be taken from him. This worried Uncle Henry a good deal, for without the farm he would have no way to earn a living. He was a good man and worked in the fields as hard as he could, and Aunt Em did all the housework with Dorothy's help. Yet they just didn't seem to get by. This little girl, Dorothy, was like dozens of little girls you know. She was loving and usually sweet-tempered, and had a round, rosy face with earnest eyes. Life was a serious thing to Dorothy, and a wonderful thing, too, for she had encountered more strange adventures in her short life than many other girls of her age. Aunt Em once thought the fairies must have marked Dorothy at her birth, because she had wandered into strange places and had always been protected by some unseen power. As for Uncle Henry, he thought his little niece merely a dreamer, as her dead mother had been, for he could not quite believe all the curious stories Dorothy told them of the land of Oz, which she had several times visited. He did not think that she tried to deceive her uncle and aunt, but he imagined that she had dreamed all of those astonishing adventures, and that the dreams had been so real to her that she'd come to believe them true. Whatever the explanation might be, it was certain that Dorothy had been absent from her Kansas home for several long periods, always disappearing unexpectedly, yet always coming back safe and sound, with amazing tales of where she had been and the unusual people she had met. Her uncle and aunt listened to her stories eagerly, and in spite of their doubts began to feel that the little girl had gained a lot of experience and wisdom that were unaccountable in this age, when fairies are supposed to no longer exist. Most of Dorothy's stories were about the land of Oz, with its beautiful Emerald City, and a lovely girl ruler named Ozma, who was the most faithful friend of the little Kansas girl. When Dorothy told about the riches of the fairy country, Uncle Henry would sigh, for he knew that a single one of the great emeralds that were so common there would pay all his debts and leave his farm free. But Dorothy never brought any jewels home with her, so their poverty became greater every year. When the banker told Uncle Henry that he must pay the money in 30 days or leave the farm, the poor man was in despair, as he knew he could not possibly get the money. So he told his wife Aunt Em of his trouble, and she first cried a little, then said that they must be brave and do the best they could and go away somewhere and try to earn an honest living. But they were getting old and feeble, and she feared that they could not take care of Dorothy as well as they had formerly done. Probably the little girl would also be obliged to go to work. They did not tell their niece the sad news for several days, not wishing to make her unhappy. But one morning the little girl found Aunt Em softly crying while Uncle Henry tried to comfort her. Then Dorothy asked them to tell her what was the matter. "We must give up the farm, my dear," replied her uncle sadly. "Wander away into the world to work for our living." The girl listened quite seriously, for she had not known before how desperately poor they were. "We don't mind for ourselves," said her aunt, stroking the little girl's hand tenderly. "But we love you as if you were our own child, and we're so heartbroken to think you must also endure poverty and work for a living, for you've grown big and strong." "Well, what could I do to earn money?" asked Dorothy. "You might do housework for someone, my dear, or you are so handy, perhaps you could be a nursemaid to little children. I'm not sure exactly what you can do to earn money, but if your uncle and I are supposed to support you, we'll do it willingly and send you to school. We fear, though, that we shall have much trouble in earning a living for ourselves. No one wants to employ old people who are broken down in health as we are." Dorothy smiled. "Wouldn't it be funny," she said, "for me to do housework in Kansas when I'm a princess in the land of Oz?" "A princess!" they both exclaimed, astonished. "Yes, Ozma made me a princess some time ago, and she has often begged me to come and live always in the Emerald City," said the child. Her uncle and aunt looked at each other in amazement. Then the man said, "Do you suppose you could manage to return to your fairyland, my dear?" "Oh, yes," replied Dorothy. "I could do that easy." "How?" asked Aunt Em. "Ozma sees me every day at 4 o'clock in her magic picture. She can see me wherever I am, no matter what I'm doing, and at that time, if I make a certain sign, she will send for me by means of the magic belt, which I once captured from the Gnome King. Then, in the wink of an eye, I shall be with Ozma in her palace." The elder people remained silent for some time after Dorothy had spoken. Finally, Aunt Em said, with another sigh of regret, "If that's the case, Dorothy, perhaps you'd better go to live in the Emerald City. Break our hearts to lose you from our lives, but you will be so much better off with your fairy friends that it seems wisest and best for you to go." "I'm not so sure about that," remarked Uncle Henry, shaking his gray head doubtfully. "These things all seem real to Dorothy, I know, but I'm afraid our little girl won't find her fairyland just what she had dreamed it to be. It would make me very unhappy to think that she was wandering among some strangers who might be unkind to her." Dorothy laughed merrily at this speech, and then she became very sober again, for she could see how all this trouble was worrying her aunt and uncle, and knew that unless she found a way to help them, their future lives would be quite miserable and unhappy. She knew that she could help them. She'd thought of a way already, yet she did not tell them at once what it was, because she must ask Ozma's consent before she would be able to carry out her plans. So she only said, "If you'll promise not to worry about me, I'll go to Land Oz this very afternoon, and I'll make a promise, too, that you shall both see me again before the day comes when you must leave this farm." "Day isn't very far away now," her uncle sadly replied. "I did not tell you of our trouble till I was obliged to, dear Dorothy, so the evil time is near at hand. If you are quite sure your fairy friends will give you a home, it might be best for you to go to them, as your aunt says." That was why Dorothy went to her little room in the attic that afternoon, taking with her a small dog named Toto. The dog had curly black hair and big brown eyes and loved Dorothy very dearly. The child had kissed her aunt and uncle affectionately before she went upstairs, and now she looked around her little room rather wistfully, gazing at the simple trinkets and worn calico and gingham dresses as if they were old friends. She was tempted at first to make a bundle of them, yet she knew very well that they would be of no use to her in her future life. She sat down on a broken-backed chair, the only one the room contained, and, holding Toto in her arms, waited patiently until the clock struck 4. Then she made the secret signal that had been agreed upon between her and Ozma. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em waited downstairs. They were uneasy and a good deal excited, for this is a practical humdrum world, and it seemed to them quite impossible that their little niece could vanish from their home and travel instantly to Fairyland. So they watched the stairs, which seemed to be the only way that Dorothy could get out of the farmhouse, and they watched them a long time. They heard the clock strike 4, but there was no sound from above. 4:30 came, and now they were too impatient to wait any longer. Softly they crept up the stairs to the door of the little girl's room. "Dorothy! Dorothy!" they called, but there was no answer. They opened the door and looked in. The room was empty. And that is the end of Chapter 2. Tomorrow night we'll read Chapter 3, How Ozma Granted Dorothy's Request. We're probably going to find out Dorothy went to Fairyland, and we're going to see what her plan is. So join me tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, Facebook Live. I'll see you then. Thanks, everybody. Good night.